Hello everyone, my name is Brian, but you can call me the Bugler, and today we're going to be breaking down all of the skill changes from patch 1.1.0, so let's get started. The first change we'll be talking about primarily affects the skill Magnitude for the Code of the Earthshaker skill tree. The change is this: reduces the recharge rate of additional grenade charges beyond the first. So this skill grants us 2 grenades. Thereby, the second grenade should now take us longer to charge than the first grenade would. Let's take a look at that. The results are very clear. Not only is the rate in which we gain our second grenade back reduced, it's done significantly so. Our first grenade takes 1 minute and 23 seconds to recuperate, whereas our second grenade will now take about 2 minutes and 43 seconds. An entire minute and 20 seconds longer. Keep in mind, with this skill tree, we can still mitigate some of this cooldown with aftershocks or an insurmountable skull fort, but it's still a significant nerf in my opinion. Up next is Hammer Strike for the Code of the Fireforged skill tree. This melee ability, according to the patch notes, had its debuff increased by 1 second. That should bring it up to 6 seconds. When I tested this, I found this to be true. So it increased our duration from 5 seconds to 6 seconds, but also indirectly buffed our damage. We now deal 11 ticks worth of burn damage instead of what was originally 8. So overall, a buff here. But this did come paired with a very strange mobility nerf in my opinion. They made it so our shoulder charge, if done in the air with no enemies around, will now drop all of our momentum. So if you do the shoulder charge in the air, you'll basically drop like a rock and go almost nowhere, where originally you were able to use this as a nice way to get around or change direction in the air. This is a change that I not only don't quite understand, but I'm not really a fan of. It applies to every version of the charge, so each charge that each subclass has been nerfed in this way. Let's move on to another buff, and one that I believe was listed in a rather misleading way in the patch notes. According to the notes, an increased number of hammers can be thrown during Hammer of Soul. This is somewhat true. For the Code of the Fireforged and the base version of the Super, you're now able to throw 6 hammers comfortably, whereas originally if you were throwing them at a range, you'd only be able to get 5 out. However, you could throw 6 if you threw them directly at your feet. This also applies to the Siegebreaker Titan if he's not standing inside a sunspot. However, the increased number of hammers does not apply to a Siegebreaker standing in a sunspot, meaning you'll still only be able to throw the same 10 hammers that you could throw originally. So, even though it is a little bit misleading, it's still more of a direct buff to the Fireforged skill tree. But there's quite a bit of love for the Siegebreaker Titan in this patch, even if the patch notes list it incorrectly. According to the patch notes, the Sunspot health regeneration buff now lingers for 3 seconds after moving through a sunspot. I'm not familiar with this health regeneration buff that the Sunspot grants, but I am familiar with Sun Warrior. Passing through a sunspot causes your solar abilities to recharge faster and your super to last longer. This is what they were talking about. So even if it's listed incorrectly, let's cover what it actually does. When you step into a sunspot, you gain the buff Sun Warrior. However, it's now on a timer that begins at 3 seconds. As long as you're standing in the sunspot, this timer will not count down, and the sunspots have the same duration that they originally did, about 20 seconds. However, since Sun Warrior now has a timer on it, technically Sun Warrior lasts for 23 seconds. But the real power here is that you can now move between sunspots without dropping your Sun Warrior buff, allowing you to move around the battlefield and keep your recharge rate up. And it has great synergy with Endless Siege. Because it lasts for 3 seconds, it allows us to weave between the sunspots that we create with Endless Siege by throwing hammers, in order to keep our super duration up and throw out our 10 maximum hammers while remaining mobile. This basically negates one of the biggest criticisms I've seen of the Siegebreaker super, in that you need to stand still in order to get the maximum value out of it. This, in my opinion, is a very good buff for the Siegebreaker. This next thing that we're about to cover is a little bit controversial, although I don't know if the community quite knows it's controversial yet. Once this gets to be more widespread information, we'll see how players really feel about it. According to the patch notes, the base duration of Golden Gun is now the same for both paths. What I originally thought when I read this was that the 6-shooter skill now had a 12-second duration, the original base duration of the Golden Gun Super. However, that is not the case at all. It actually seems like a bit of a buff to 6-shooter, but a nerf to the other versions of Golden Gun. Let's take a look. On the left, I'm using the Way of the Outlaw skill tree with 6-shooter unlocked, and on the right, I'm using the Way of the Sharpshooter. You'll find that both of them have the same exact base duration now, at 8 seconds. This means the Way of the Sharpshooter was nerfed from 12 seconds to 8, whereas the Way of the Outlaw was buffed from 6 seconds to 8. This is a very weird change in my opinion, and something that I feel like they tried to hide in the patch notes with the way that this was worded. Let's take a look at how this affects the Line 'em Up skill for the Way of the Sharpshooter next. Line 'em Up increases the duration of your Golden Gun by 50% for each precision hit you land, meaning you can increase the duration of your Golden Gun by 100% for the remaining amount of time after your 2 initial shots. So originally, we could have a duration of up to 23 seconds after we got our first 2 shots off. After this nerf, we can now only get that to about 15 seconds. In this scenario, I get it to about 14.5 seconds, but it wasn't optimal. In the optimal scenario, I could get it to about 15. Moving on to our next Hunter change. According to the patch notes, they increased the amount of time available to fire arrows while using the Mobius Quiver upgrade for the Shadow Shot Super. Mobius Quiver originally had a duration of 6 seconds. However, with the new patch, it now has a duration of 8 seconds, the same as Golden Gun. You'll only be able to get out 6 shots, however. No matter how much I tried, I could not get out any more than 6 shots. I believe that this is still the maximum. If I'm wrong, feel free to correct me in the comments. The next buff to the Night Stalker is that we will now suppress on hit of Shadow Shot instead of on tether. I couldn't test this in PvP with the Prometheus Lens Nightmare, but I can test it in PvE, and as you can see here, when we hit an enemy, they become enveloped in the Void Light as soon as the tether hits them, meaning that they become suppressed as soon as they are struck. I'm assuming this transfers to PvP, however, I could not get any footage of this without being completely melted every single time I tried. Now we're moving on to our final Hunter piece, and it's another one that I thought was very misleading in the patch notes. According to the notes, the Ark Strider dodge will briefly break tracking. I thought this was referring to lightning reflexes, however this proved not to be the case. We'll get to that shortly. What this does is when you dodge, you briefly break tracking. So if it's something that has aggressive tracking like this thing that I'm dodging in PvE, it will still continue to track you after the dodge has ended. Where this is a little misleading is that it applies to every version of the Hunter's dodge, not only the Ark Striders. There is a clear winner here, however, and it belongs to the Way of the Trapper, because they have the skill Vanishing Step. Vanishing Step makes it so when you dodge, you briefly become invisible. So what this means is that when you dodge something that has aggressive tracking, as long as you remain invisible, it won't have enough time to recover and re-track you, because it won't track you as long as you're invisible. And finally, we're moving on to the Warlock. It's going to be a short one because this is really the only thing that they changed here. Cataclysm will now maintain its initial speed for longer after throwing. It's really cool to see in action, so let's take a look. After I throw my Nova Bomb, I give chase, and you can see that initially it outpaces me until it hits its slowdown point and I'm able to catch up to it. Now since I didn't test this in the original version of the game, I can't tell you how much the initial speed duration has actually increased here, but I can tell you that you'll definitely feel a difference when using it, and I think it's a nice quality of life improvement for the Voidwalker. And that's the end of this patch note breakdown. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions about how I conducted the tests, or why I might not have included other footage, please let me know in the comments so I could answer them for you. And I'm also going to preempt some questions here. The main one I bet you're all wondering is why I didn't test grenades and why I didn't show the things that they removed. Well, the things that they removed, naturally I didn't think I needed to show them because they were removed. So I tested to make sure that they were actually removed, and if that was the case, I didn't include any footage of it. So, every single thing that they said they removed, I found to be correct. The thing about the grenades is, I don't feel like that really belongs here because it's more of a sandbox change, not really a subclass skill change. I will be covering the grenades at some point. If everyone shows interest in it, I might make a video this weekend only covering the grenades for every single subclass and the damage increase or damage nerf for the pulse grenades that they received. If you'd like to join me on Twitch tonight, I should be live a little bit later than usual. You can find the links to all of my stuff in this video's description. So once again, thanks for watching, I hope I see you next time, and good luck getting through the exclusion zone.